Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a review of the Razer Viper V3 Hyperspeed, a release for me that is exceptionally confusing. I have no idea why this is called a Viper. This is a very unique mouse. I think this is going to confuse a lot of consumers, especially those that walk into big box stores and see Viper written on the box and a lower price tag than the Viper V2, even though the picture on the box is clearly obvious and blatant that it looks completely different than a Viper Ultimate. In the hand, it feels completely different than a Viper. And I think it was probably more sensical to name this the Cobra and name the Cobra a Viper Mini Ultimate. Overall, in-game, this mouse does feel, to me, akin to something along the size feel of a G703, not shape, size. And it does feel like they are going backwards, trying to get back to the feeling of something like an IntelliMouse 1.1. The mouse feels large, and it feels like a mouse that you have to palm. Taking it in game, the things I do like these side buttons. In fact, I love the side buttons. I think they are some of the best side buttons that I've used. They do have some pre-travel, some post-travel, but the way they feel, it almost feels as though there is none of either. In terms of my switches, that is something I don't like. The Razer mechanical V2s in this implementation, the way my hands rest with my index finger and my ring finger sitting on mouse 1 and mouse 2, I actually rest my fingers at the edge, top edge of mouse 1 and mouse 2, and the buttons actually do feel very mushy because of the way the plastic actually flexes over mouse 1 and mouse 2. Mouse 1 and mouse 2 are actually quite long, so you're getting a lot of surface area of plastic that is kind of flexing downward over the switches. If you hit dead on where the switches actually rest, I don't feel mushiness at all, but where my fingers rest, I actually do feel an extensive amount of mush, and it just doesn't really feel all that great. In terms of the weight, my weight is at 81 grams with the default AA battery, but you guys can see I've actually already modded the mouse with a AAA, and it does take the weight down to 69 grams, not only making the weight feel pretty good, but it also does feel pretty weight balanced with the AAA mod in the AA. So keep that in mind. You can get the weight down pretty easily and not too more expensive than what it is right now. But it would have been interesting to see Razer pack a AAA slot instead of a AA and to pack a lithium instead of the default battery, but I'm assuming, of course, they wanted to keep the cost down to call this ultimately a budget mouse. In terms of the coating, I actually do like the coating when my room isn't steaming hot when I'm recording a video and or playing games for a significant amount of time. I am on an X670E, and it does get quite hot. And when it does, and my climate being humid, the coating actually does get quite a bit more slippery. When it is pretty dry, the coating actually does feel very good, and I think it's very similar to the wired Death Adder V3. A lot of people like that coating, including myself, so I do think that the coating is quite good. In terms of the scroll wheel, I think the scroll wheel is fantastic. It is definitely reminiscent to me of the Viper V2. I think it feels great. And mouse 3 is very spammable, which to me is important because I use that button quite often. And the mouse does have a very forward sensor. If that impacts you, keep that in mind. I don't notice that it has any positive or negative impact on my gameplay. So overall, you're looking at a fairly solid build, especially for its price point. I think for budget mice, certainly there are 4K mice now for $50, but I do think that the build quality on this mouse, including the coating, the switch feel, the side buttons, everything is in a more buttoned up package that feels better than all of the random third-party brands that are releasing $50 4K mice. This mouse is compatible with the hyperpulling dongle. I have connected it. It does feel good, but certainly from my understanding, it drains the lithium batteries to 75 hours of life expectancy. So keep that in mind. It can get pretty expensive swapping out lithium batteries, but you can always get a rechargeable battery for this slot. I just don't quite know what it would take the weight to with a rechargeable battery as opposed to the lithium batteries. I think the most important thing for me is going to boil down to shape. This is not a Viper Ultimate. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the Viper Ultimate shape because it's flat, it's narrow. This is definitely a mouse that is very different than the Viper V2. It does not feel flat and it does not really feel narrow. It feels like it is going backwards towards an IntelliMouse 1.1. In fact, I've got a Ninjutsu Katana here, and you can see the length of the mouse is actually quite similar to a Ninjutsu Katana. It's just a much more trimmed version in the butt, and even at the front of the mouse, the width almost looks quite similar, with the humps actually coming up when you're looking at the mouse about as high. So it does kind of take roots from, I feel, an IntelliMouse 1.1. A lot of people might like that for tack shooters. I did back in the day. But for track-heavy games, I do not prefer this over something like the Vaxi XE, or what I've been using recently, the Ninjutsu Sora 4K, or the Pulsar X2, which I think is just a much better shape for a wider variety of games than the Viper V3 Hyperspeed. The Pulsar X2 to me just feels like it has so much more maneuverability in my hand, and it's just a shape that works for me nowadays more than what I used to use a long time ago, like the IntelliMouse 1.1, forcing me into a palm grip and a much slower kind of crosshair placement type rhythm in a tack shooter, as opposed to what I'm playing nowadays, fast-paced battle royales like Fortnite or Apex. And I guess what I mean to say is I can certainly see the tack shooter community being more likely to enjoy this mouse than the battle royale community. For me, using this side by side to my Ninjutsu Katana, I'm still more a fan of my Katana compared to the Viper V3 Hyperspeed, and I do like my Vaxi XE more than both. The Vaxi XE, in comparison to the Viper V3, is about the same in length, but it feels flatter and the hump is not as obtrusive under your palm, leaving you just a lot more inner hand maneuverability for fast-paced games like Overwatch 2, as well as Apex Legends. Even for tack shooters, for me personally, it would be a toss-up between the two, but the Vaxi XE is just a more comfortable shape for me because the hump comes up more gradually, and then it actually takes on a pretty unique shape here as you come up the hump, making the mouse feel wider and flatter as you get across up to the peak of the hump. To me, just making it more comfortable in my hand and more enjoyable of an experience. Again, for tack shooters, pretty much a toss-up. Battle royales, this would not be my pick. The Pulsar X2, again, to me, right now I'm preferring the X2 V2 over the rest of these mice in my symmetrical lineup, just because the build quality on my X2 V2 feels absolutely fantastic. And again, the shape to me, I'm getting just such a range of motion in a 360-degree radius under my palm, both horizontally and then taking it vertically, while maintaining a nice, stable base to plant my hand on and get that stability not only for tack shooters, but for battle royales as well. I think the Pulsar X2 V2 Medium is more of a medium mouse. When you get to these three mice, it really does feel like these three mice are in the large or medium to large bracket. So I think that if you're somebody who has absolutely monstrous hands, or you are somebody who prefers to palm your mouse, you may really enjoy this shape. Personally speaking, if they do come out with a pro version of this mouse that doesn't have a interswappable battery and does have opticals that feel better than my mechanical switches feel in this copy, it could be a pretty interesting mouse that could get higher up on my list. But I think right now it just falls behind too many other mice in my lineup that I don't think I would have this in my top 5. I don't think that I would have it in my top 10. The mouse I've actually been using recently, I've been using the X2 V2 again quite a lot. I've actually gone back to the Starlight 12 Small. I've even been using the Viper Mini Signature Edition. I just kind of struggle with the Signature Edition in the sense of, do I really want to have a $300 mouse sitting around when, as a reviewer, I'm constantly swapping? So for me, the Viper Mini Signature Edition is a little bit hard to justify, but I have really been enjoying the Ninjutsu Sora 4K. I feel like this is the most improved mouse on the market, going from the original Ninjutsu Sora to the 4K. This thing feels absolutely phenomenal. My next review this weekend will be of the Ninjutsu 4K and my gaming experience on it. Again, guys, the Viper V3, it is a vastly different experience to the Viper V2. So do not go into this purchase thinking that this is anything even remotely close to a Viper. It is not. I would have liked to have seen this again be called the Cobra and the Cobra be called a Viper Mini Ultimate. Overall, the things I like the coding, love the side buttons, love the scroll wheel. The switches to me were kind of just hit or miss. They're good, just not great. The skates, default skates to me were fine. I did not have an issue. And then, of course, the weight, I do have an issue with the default weight, but with the battery mod, it actually does feel quite good. So if you're somebody who's in the market for a budget performer that feels pretty good for a palm grip, this is probably something that I could recommend you check out to see if you like the shape. Otherwise, if you're like me and you like a little bit more inner hand maneuverability right now, you're playing a lot of battle royales, I would maybe point you into one of the other directions. But again, that's a very subjective thing. That's what I like. You might be very different. So I hope that helped, guys. If it did, please leave a sub to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next review. Peace.